Some vital information I feel that's important because it directly relates to the next coming election in 2020 with Donald Trump and possibly Joe Biden. And just now in Atlanta, we experienced what we would consider a horrific event. The folks in Atlanta were attempting to vote this week, and many of the folks there found themselves waiting in line from anywhere from 4 to 8 hours just to vote. And many were turned away, and surprised that they were turned away because they had been purged or removed from the list and unable to vote. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump right into this, and we're going to discuss this. I've been following this and other stories similar to this for a number of years. We didn't know how it was going to really look, but I want to play this clip for you here.
In line for hours due to a shortage of workers and issues with new voting machines. Nancy Chen has the details.
There's a lot of finger pointing the day after thousands of Georgia voters waited in long lines to cast ballots in the state's primary election.
Normally, I wait in line for like maybe an hour, maybe. This time, I've already been in line for 3 hours.
Georgia reported problems with new voting machines and a shortage of experienced poll workers due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But some blame voter suppression tactics.
I don't think it's the new machines. I do think that there is systematic disenfranchisement of specific communities.
There were also issues with absentee ballots in certain counties.
The majority of folks I heard had applied for an absentee ballot and it was never processed. And I don't really have an answer for why that happened. It's very disappointing.
Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger blames the delays on county election officials and said his office is launching an investigation.
It's just totally disorganized mess. They had 3 additional months to get ready for this. They've had those machines for 6 months now.
But critics, including Georgia's 2018 Democratic nominee for governor Stacey Abrams, say Raffensperger is to blame.
The Secretary of State is the superintendent of elections. That means it's his job to make sure that democracy works in every county. What we saw happen in Georgia was a failure of investment, a failure of training, and a failure of direction.
Georgia is expected to be a battleground state in November, and there's concern whether the problems will be fixed by then. Nancy Chen, CBS News, New York.
This is a developing story. Because for years now, people have been concerned since the last election. The last election was so close and so tight with voters, largely because a lot of us didn't turn out to vote. And so, first of all, we need to vote. We can't blame that on anybody. But I will say this, you're going to encounter some additional challenges this year in your voting. Atlanta was a prime example of what's going on. For the last couple of years, Republicans and others, sympathizers, if you will, I'll call them sympathizers, have been going along and allowing the Republicans to purge the list of voters. And what do I mean by purge the list? There's a list of a number of people that generally vote in these big time elections. Your name is on a list, you're registered to vote, you've never really had a problem with voting. You can get out and you can express your will and vote. This year, though, there's been some challenges because the Republican Party has strategically mapped out states that it would love to take people off that voting list. Now, a lot of you are going to push back at me and say, well, that's not true. That's speculation. But it's very, very true. In this particular situation, it was a compounding event. We had a situation where there were new voting machines, untrained registration people, and they cut out a lot of the voting locations due to COVID-19. So those were compounding events. But here's the thing. That's going to happen all over the country. Now, but the truth of the matter is, the Republican Party didn't feel like they could win on level ground, so they have strategically went out and removed Democratic voting, people who would normally vote Democratic. They have strategically targeted those areas and purged the list of voters. Now, some of you are going to think that's outrageous. That's crazy, right? Well, it's not. It's a tactic. It's a strategic move that they use and they will continue to use. And the only thing we have to do to offset that is check our voting status. You would hate to get there after a long day of work or whatever your schedule is to get there to vote, try to vote, only to find out that you can't vote. And if you think I'm just kind of blowing smoke here, I want to show you something that I think will help. So, one of the articles I was reading shows clearly where this article came out this past February, and it was talking about how Republicans were, as I was saying earlier, removing people from voting, from the voting list, giving people a hard time and taking them off the voting list. In other words, they were targeting certain areas around the United States, and they were removing percentages of people from the voting. Okay? So, let me give you an example. Between the years of 2016 and 2018, more than 17 million names have been taken off the voter rolls nationwide. Now, 17 million out of 350 million people, some of which are children, so you kind of take some of the number out of that. It's not a huge number, but when we have a close race, it is a huge number because these are voting people. Okay? So in Indiana, 22.3% of voters, people that are known to vote, have been removed from the list. And here's the thing. They don't know that they've been removed from the list. Okay? Virginia, 14%. Wisconsin, 14%. Massachusetts, 12.1%. Let me remind you again, these are people that normally vote. These aren't the people that sit at home on their couch, talk about voting. These are actual voters. Oklahoma, 11.7%. Maine, 11.2%. And these are the numbers so far that they had calculated back in February. Well, we're quite a ways away from that now. This is what Republicans have been working on, is removing you from the voting list. And so as a result, what happens there is you show up to vote and you can't. And what that's going to produce is a lot of frustration and a lot of resentment and confusion. Plus, we're in the pandemic, so that means that it takes a lot of work just to get there and wait in this long line. It's going to be a long line. Okay? And this is one of the most important elections, I think, we've ever had. And so I'm encouraging everyone to check your voting status. It's imperative that you check your voting status. We cannot miss the opportunity to vote this time around. This is going to be probably one of the biggest voting ordeals that we've faced in many, many years. Going back to when African Americans were first given the opportunity to vote, and people faced ridicule, pressure, violence in order to be able to vote. With all that's going on right now, with Black Lives Matters and all the political upheaval that's going on right now, it's going to behoove you to go ahead and make sure, check and make sure that you are able to vote. Okay? Because these tactics are possibly unfair, but they're legal. These tactics have been used for many years, but this has been the biggest push of all times because certain people really want Donald Trump to be able to win the election fair and square, even though it may not appear fair to us. These are legal practices that they're using. And if we don't check and see that we can vote, then the fault falls back on us. So I just want to remind you, we've got about another 5-6 months before the actual voting will start. In some states there's early voting, but with all that's going on, you want to make sure that you've taken extra measures to make sure that you can vote and your right to vote has not been taken away. This is David Lucas, and this is In the News.